Guys, I think we're live now. So we are going
Happy Friday, everybody. We have a special guest.
There we go. All right, Landon's going to look at your guys' comments throughout this and bring in your guys' questions. Today we have the incomparable, the amazing, the fantastic Jack Posobiec on. How are you doing, Jack?
Doing fantastic. How are you doing? 大家好，我非常好的。谢谢你，欢迎我来到这个房间和你们。
Now we've pleased all of our Chinese followers. So, we wanted to have you on today because every time I have a question about China, I end up texting you and talking to you anyway. So I figured, you know what? All of our followers could really benefit from your analysis on China and what's going on. This is a crazy time. Most of the country's on lockdown. And it all goes back to what happened in China, and I think that for a lot of people, I've been shocked by the type of people who have reached out to us that were non-political. In fact, one happened today where I couldn't believe it when my wife told me. They reached out and they were like, this is absolute BS. This is all China's fault. If China hadn't lied and they hadn't done this all came from their lab, all this stuff. The type of person this is would shock anybody. Like, she's the perfect profile for like a resist voter, and absolutely has been red-pilled by this experience and sees through what is going on here. So, have you seen that sort of thing?
Well, I have seen a lot of opinion poll tracking, and even just sort of regular folks. So let me sort of take that back for a second. In the opinion polls, it's very clear that while people's opinions of President Trump aren't necessarily shifting in terms of this, like you've got people have already sort of made up their mind on the guy, whether they like him or not. But people's opinions on China are rapidly becoming negative. And it used to only be that Republicans had a maximally negative view of China and certainly the Chinese government, whereas Democrats, it was kind of more in the middle. That number has really shot up. The centrist independent number for China has really shot down in terms of approval rating, is what I'm trying to say. And so you've noticed this sort of shift among a lot of the sort of techno centrists, like the tech bros and the people who are just sort of like, like I just want progress, man. I just want to advance the country. And so they really bought into the allure of China early on because they saw so much tremendous growth, so much advancement, so much technological prowess coming out of China, that where the Chinese, because their government can, order whatever they want to happen at any given time. It's almost sort of like this non-regulatory paradise where if you dream it, you can just make it happen. But now that sheen has sort of worn off, and people are realizing how much propaganda was involved in all of that, and how much that was done for their benefit to be able to bring China into the global order. Because now we're starting to see people say, you know what, we gave China a shot and they failed. We tried to treat them like a responsible player and they decided not to be. They lied to us. They withheld information. They covered things up. They silenced whistleblowers. And you know what? It turns out that the cynics on China were right. And so from my own perspective, I guess I would say that there's a number of massive, you can call them red pills in a sense. There's a number of massive red pills that are going on for people right now. Particularly, I think that China has always sort of been this sort of other for a lot of people. I think that on average, Americans don't know a lot about China. And what's interesting for me is that when people ask me about China, they don't even know where to start. Like they ask me questions like, do they have cars in China? What do they eat in China? Do they go to school? Like basic level, 9 to 5 type questions that they really just have no knowledge of, because typically, the Chinese government isn't putting forward that message. If there's anything you've heard about China, it's either, currently Chinese military, that's very, very big, or ancient Chinese history. So ancient Chinese culture, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon is probably like the last really big international movie to come out of China. Now, obviously not the only international movie that's been funded by China, but that's another story. But in terms of something that's actually showing,
I have no idea how much money China spends on funding our films. I do because my company works with these movie studios, and it's insane. I would say it's almost every other big major blockbuster, almost every other one has major Chinese investment behind it.
Yeah, so China has, and the Chinese regime, the communist regime of China under Xi Jinping, who's their current chairman, he has installed himself as chairman for life back in 2012. We'll see how that shakes out. There may be some question about that now, but his ascension to power was in 2012. So theoretically, he'd be stepping down in 2022, but he's crafted a cult of personality around himself that hasn't been seen in China since the days of Mao. He's really centered the entire regime focus around him in a way that we haven't really seen. The past couple Chinese chairmen in between have sort of been technocrats, at least between Deng Xiaoping and now. And so really what we're looking for and what Xi has understood is that America has numerous centers of gravity. America has numerous what they view as vulnerabilities. And there's a book called Unrestricted Warfare. It was written in 1999 by two senior Chinese colonels of the PLA. They view China's rise, they view China's warfare ability, they view China's strength all as facets of the same thing. There's no separations in their society, right? There's no separation between the military, the government, academia, business, the party. It's all one cohesive sociocultural unit. And because of that, they view funding Hollywood movies as a way of increasing the strength of China overseas. They view gobbling up the rare earth elements around the world, to include Greenland, as part of increasing China's strength in the world, because if they can find what everybody wants, get there first, use their money and use their economic resources against them, debt trap diplomacy they've been conducting throughout South America, throughout Africa, now 5G diplomacy they're deploying in Western Europe increasingly, and even a little bit of infrastructure diplomacy in Central and Eastern Europe. What you're really starting to see is this sort of inflated and almost aided rise of China that the entire global ruling class of the West has enabled, and has said, you know what, look, they bought they bought what they were selling. They bought the propaganda line. They brought the party line of, if we can make cheap goods in China at next to no cost compared to any other country, then our margins are going to be so much better by selling those products inside the United States, selling those products inside Europe. Then why wouldn't we outsource our jobs there? Why wouldn't we outsource all our manufacturing? And this is something that, regardless of your view, again, I'm not here in a partisan context, but regardless of your view of Donald Trump as a person or as a politician, the one thing that you really do have to give him credit for is he's the first public figure in the United States in a very long time to use his platform, his absolutely massive platform, to call attention to the rising threat of China. He's been doing so for over 10 years.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. That was huge. So, I think you made a great point when you talked about people's sort of miseducation on China, because that was something that I found going to China was, all the questions I did get from American friends, they were so disconnected from reality. And I thought about it and I was like, what did I ever learn in school about China? And I never learned about Mao in public school. I never learned about China. I never learned about what, the cost of communism was in China. That was never talked about. So I think there's also a failure of American education to properly, provide that context of what these countries go through, what they've done, and sort of the body count of their regimes. And that's something that we just were not serving American children.
Well, American education it's America focused, right? And there's obviously reasons for that. We want to teach our own history to our kids, even though we could certainly have a whole other interview talking about the failures of the American public education system. But it really does do a poor job, I think, of giving us a world education. And when the U.S. and China have never really come to blows in any major conflict, with the exception of a few spots like Vietnam or North Korea during the Korean War, there isn't really a lot for the American narrative to latch onto. And because in public education in the United States, where they sort of skim over things, they say, oh, you memorize this date, memorize that date, and then you're good, you're educated. They don't actually tell you the stories. They don't actually tell you why these things matter. They just make you memorize them so you can pass some tests, right? But to understand that Chairman Mao came to power on the back of World War II, that Chairman Mao was supported by the Soviet Union originally. That's what propped him up. And it was him taking over China after the nationalist government had been battling the Japanese all throughout World War II. China was, or the communists were the sort of subversive group that had grown to a massive following, to the point where China almost had two governments at this point. And then if you count Japan having the regime take over all of Eastern China, they were the ones that were fighting the government of China, were the communists. They just kind of kicked back out to the farmlands and said, hey, you guys fight it out. And so when the government of China became so weakened after fighting Japan, this was Chiang Kai-shek's government, Chairman Mao rolled in and started the Chinese Civil War almost immediately after the end of World War II. They did defeat the nationalist government because they were so weakened. There's lots of debate as to why the United States did not really come in to support and defend that nationalist government, the Republic of China, but their government was pushed out off to an island off the coast of mainland China, which we now refer to, and at the time it was referred to mostly as Formosa, but now we refer to that as Taiwan. And Taiwan, so that's something I really want to give people an explanation of, because there's a lot of people that even in my mentions lately didn't understand. They said, Jack, what is the deal with China and Taiwan? Are they different countries? Are they, are they at war with each other? What's going on? Well, here's the thing, is Taiwan is where the government fled to after the Civil War. So they still claim legitimacy over the rest of China. That's why they're the Republic of China, not just Taiwan as their own country. And they continue to maintain that they are the legitimate government of China. The United States upheld this all the way up until 1979. So actually, it was the government of the Republic of China that held the UN seat for China on the Security Council, on the Permanent Security Council. That was held by what we would consider Taiwan. So the communists still view them as sort of like the original enemy in a sense, and they consider Taiwan to be a province in an open state of rebellion against the against the motherland. And so, of course, Taiwan has been isolated after almost 70 years of this, and so Taiwan has been kicked out systematically of almost every international organization. They've been punted aside. They've been shunned. You don't need to look any further than this current coronavirus situation.
And the World Health Organization,
the WHO, right? The WHO, and so this, I'm giving you the context, but now it makes sense. Oh, the WHO didn't listen to China. Why? Or excuse me, didn't listen to Taiwan. Why didn't you listen to Taiwan? Well, because you're just some isolated organization in rebellion against Beijing and the rightful communist rulers, right? Why should we care if you're talking about human-to-human transmission? Why should we care about some outbreak in Wuhan? It's just told by you Taiwanese, you rebellious troublemakers. We're waiting for the serious politicians in Beijing to tell us the truth. And then, of course, it comes out that it turns out that Taiwan was actually right, and Taiwan was trying to do the right thing and warn the world about this horrible pandemic before it broke out of China, and they weren't listened to.
All right, let's talk about, can you answer, what is the World Health Organization like? Why are they under such a stronghold by China? What is the relation? What's the relationship there?
So the relationship in general when it comes to China is that China understood from a very early position, this is going back 20 years, that they wanted to be on top in the world. China views themselves, and actually the word for China in Chinese is Zhongguo, which actually literally means central kingdom, Zhong, central, Guo, kingdom, Zhongguo. So this idea that they are the central kingdom goes back to ancient Asian history, where for a very long time they certainly were the central kingdom of all of Asia. They were the overstate. They were, every country around them was vassals. I mean, look at Vietnam. For 1,000 years was ruled by China essentially, and Japan was little brother for a very long time until World War II came along. Because just like every little brother eventually comes up to beat up one big brother. It's just kind of how life goes. So But what China understood was that they wanted to regain that status throughout the rest of the entire world. And they saw the British on top and they saw the Americans on top, and they realized that they'd never be able to face us on the field of battle militarily. They'd never be able to stop us economically. But they realized, as looking at the world system, they said, that's interesting. These powerful countries have all given over a little bit of their own sovereignty to these international organizations, the United Nations, in some cases, the ICC. That U.S. is not part of the ICC, but the International Criminal Court, Interpol, the World Health Organization, all of these various different organizations where China realized, well, hold on, we don't actually need to counter those countries themselves. What we need to do is get into these organizations, subvert them from the inside, make sure to promote people and to work so that only our people are the ones that become in charge. Only people who agree with the Chinese line on everything are the ones who will be able to come in charge. And they've been working to do that for decades at this point. A lot of this goes back to something called the United Front Work Department. So the United Front Work Department is an actual arm of the Chinese Communist Party. They had started in the 1940s. They kind of went away. Xi Jinping brought them back. Their specific goal is to increase China's power and influence outside the People's Republic. And they specifically target elites. They target academics. We've seen Chinese funding for all of these different universities, a lot of this different research around the world. And they use tactics like political correctness. They claim racism in case someone is attacking China. And they make sure to prop up people throughout these different organizations that come back and support China. And when I talk about this department, let me be very clear, I'm not talking about a couple of guys in an office somewhere. The United Front Work Department in China is 40,000 party members strong, 40,000 staff members, with a budget that's reportedly in the billions of dollars is given by Xi Jinping. So he really views this as their ability to go around the world and increase China's strength by buying influence, by trading on influence, by making sure that their own leaders are the leaders of these international organizations. So the WHO obviously has been caught in one of these situations where they've got somebody, this guy Tedros, who all along has been parroting whatever China says back to him. And what's very clear about Tedros, and which is a direct attack on his credibility, where he discredited himself, was when Taiwan started to be critical of Dr. Tedros. He immediately turned around and claimed that Taiwan was being racist against him.
Yep. I think one of the things that is important to talk about here is, this influence, it doesn't just, I think, one of the ironic things here is that if this tracks the way it looks like it's tracking, and we're able, and our intelligence is able to confirm that the virus did in fact come from a lab in Wuhan, and that's the direction this goes, there's some conversation that has to happen about culpability. And I think part of that culpability is there's an opening now for the United States. If that's the case, and China lied to the whole world and the entire world paid the price, our global economy crashed, people are out of work, people are going to be homeless, there's just, the long-term effects are going to be so long lasting and so incredible. You have to ask the question, what openings are there going to be for our government to be able to take advantage and expand our own influence and diminish China's as a result of them lying? And that's something I think, there's sort of a weird irony in it, because from all accounts, what I've heard, the reason that China was even doing this type of stuff in the lab, I'm sure that there's some that would argue a nefarious reason, but some of the reason is, they want to show they can compete with the United States and that they can do what we do. And if that's in fact the case, and this happened, and let's pretend it was an accident in best case scenario, even then it shows a level of negligence that they couldn't do what we can do. And so you have to ask, what is that end result going to look like in terms of the opening for the United States to take advantage of their failure to sort of bring some people back home who have gone into the arms of China?
Well, what we really have to do here is, bottom line, there needs to be a serious investigation of everything that went on. The French were trying to get into that lab just last week, and they actually had helped China set up that lab. The United States helped fund that lab. That's all come out. We were working directly with China, particularly after the SARS outbreak, to be able to help set up. There's a reason it's called the CDC in China, the Chinese CDC, because we helped them set it up. The French actually went in physically, helped them set up this lab. The French couldn't even get in there. They were blocking our CDC originally. They eventually settled for an international group of scientists, and everybody could only send like one person rather than send an actual team to go in. So there's no question that there needs to be a serious investigation of, regardless of, you know, whether it's the wet market or whether it's the bats, whether it's the lab or the soup, right? You know, obviously we need to make sure that these labs are following international best standards, regardless of whether or not it came out of there. I think people get wrapped up around that question so much, and want to argue back and forth. Well, it mutated this way, so that tends to say it's natural, or it mutated that way. So stop. We need to make sure that China is being careful in their bat virus lab. Period. Yep. End of story, regardless of why. They don't need to know why. And the Washington Post, Josh Rogan had the story where State Department cables were coming out from even before the Trump administration, and then even during, talking about their worries about this lab. They weren't figured out what was going on with it. Now, we don't really have a very good source network in China. As we know, the Chinese government rolled up our CIA source network at that point. So there's a huge blind spot for us there, because we don't have any sort of independent verification of what's going on. It's, oh, we just got to take China's word for it, like Tedros did. I don't necessarily think that's a good idea. And I think the rest of the world is starting to open up to that. You've seen a lot of talk. Even the Prime Minister of Australia came out recently and said that he backs not only an investigation into China, but an investigation into the WHO, and that he thinks that all members of the WHO should call for this. Look, Australia and New Zealand have long been the first targets of Chinese influence operations. China is attempting to peel Australia and New Zealand away from their Western cultural influence. Obviously, they were Commonwealth countries at one point of the British Empire. The population is still majority European in these areas, but geographically, they're in China's backyard, is the way China looks at it, right? They're just across the South China Sea, as China refers to as their own pond. And so the influence operations there, in terms of political meddling, in terms of donations, in terms of propping up Chinese American organizations, or excuse me, Chinese Australian organizations, of propping up, in some cases, actual politicians who have been elected to parliament in Australia that have later come out, have had ties to the Chinese state.
They have a whistleblower right now, right?
They do have a whistleblower who, I believe it was early last year, did eventually defect to Australia. They've given some information to the Australian intelligence services. Obviously, Australia being a member of Five Eyes, they're going to be sharing that information with us. So that information is still classified. A lot of it hasn't come out yet, but we are getting a huge look into how China is using its influence operations. And that's why I think it's very important for the United States and also Canada to look at Australia and look at New Zealand, because they are the test bed for the Chinese, that United Front Work Department, the test bed for this, to figure out what they are going to start doing. You're already starting to see it happen in the United States and across Europe. Look at Australia and New Zealand, a little bit in Canada as well already, and you're going to see what's coming here next.
Right. Why wouldn't, to vindicate themselves, like why would China not want some kind of, third party to come in and say, hey, look, these are facilities. We haven't violated anything. Nothing happened here. Why wouldn't they, at least just from the propaganda defense, standpoint, want to show the world it's not us, to vilify someone else? That's the question I have. I don't understand. Or is there just an attitude of, we don't even need to do that? Like we're above
there's various attitudes at play here, as well as the mindset of a Chinese leader that you have to talk about. So in Chinese culture, they have this concept of face, which is very, very important in China. And face is not only important on an interpersonal level, like I have face with my friends, I have face with my family. That's your respect, it's your reputation to uphold, and upholding it is even more important than honesty, even more important than integrity. It's in the United States, typically in the West, we place importance on, well, that person's honest, that person has integrity, right? They said something even though it was unpopular, they did the right thing even though, you know, they caught a lot of flack for it, right? That's a very Western way of looking at things. In China, it's about, did you make sure to maintain your family's respect? Did you make sure to maintain your organizational respect? Did you make sure to uphold the values of China as the Chinese regime? Again, as I mentioned before, it's a whole of society approach. It's a collectivist mindset. This goes back to Confucianism. This is why communism was so compatible with this type of thinking, because it already has that very collectivist mindset. You actually go back and there's a great and I'm sorry if it doesn't sound like I'm answering your question directly, because I'm trying to convey context as to why China wouldn't want to do something, because we're talking about intent, right? Go watch the movie Hero with Jet Li. And you're like, well, the Hero with Jet Li, what does that have to do with you know, the coronavirus pandemic? We'll explain. So that movie was, I mean, made for the Chinese government, is made by the Chinese government. It's a complete propaganda film. And so it's a film where, in a normal Western sense, like think of Star Wars, right? Star Wars, a group of rebels takes down the Empire, right? That's the story of Star Wars. And that's a very American kind of story, right? A group of rebels taking down the Empire and instituting a new birth of freedom, right? That's America's origin story. But in Hero by Jet Li, or with Jet Li, there's a group of rebels that goes against the Emperor. And then the leader of the rebels, or I guess the greatest warrior, who is Jet Li, he, at the end of it, he kills his friends at the behest of the Emperor, because he realizes that upholding the empire is the best thing for the people, and their rebellion is what must be quelled because they are terrorists. That's how that's like the big ending scene of the film. I'm sorry, spoilers. But to give you a sense of, it's a complete distortion, a complete 180 view from the way that like a Westerner would think how a storyline would play out. But there's a very important reason for that. And that a very important reason is because China will uphold the regime. They will uphold the party at any cost. And if that cost means that they're going to lose credibility on the world stage, then so be it. Because at the end of the day, the Chinese Communist Party needs to maintain its grip on China. They have a lot of internal pressures that even as they're pushing out around the world, they still have to deal with their internal pressures. We just saw the thousands, tens of thousands of people in Hong Kong flooding the streets for weeks, protesting for democracy. Obviously, Taiwan is an issue. They've got 1 million Uyghurs. That's the Muslim. They're the majority of Xinjiang province, which is, you know, used to be known as East Turkestan until China took it over. And they've got them in concentration camps now because they're worried about separatist movements up there. The entire, you know, I feel like we don't even talk about it anymore, but Tibet, right? We all know about Tibet, right? Remember that? Free Tibet flags? Where are those all gone? Why doesn't anybody talk about Tibet anymore? Brad Pitt, you know, made the movie 7 Years in Tibet. He got banned from China after that. For making it. That was the last time that anyone's really made a critical, like it was 96 or 97, the last time anyone's really made a critical film of China. And he was banned. They actually talked to a guy who was a producer on 7 Years in Tibet once, and he even smuggled a camera up in there so they could get actual footage from inside Tibet that's used in the movie, which was really, really cool. I think the rest of it they shot across the border in Nepal. But this understanding of massive internal struggles inside of China, not to mention their unemployment figures. I mean, think about it, right? We obviously in the United States, we're in a very crazy situation right now, but this is like a voluntary unemployment, so it's a little bit different than regular economic problems. Obviously, there's a lot of people who want to get back to work, and I'm sympathetic to that. But I also point out that we're doing this because of the pandemic. We're not doing this because our economy had any, you know, systemic problems. On the other hand, in China, those, you know, we have these reopen protests from people who are unemployed right now. In China, they have unemployment protests every single day out in the provinces that are out in the middle of China, where they don't have access to the internet, where they don't have access to the international internet, where all of this stuff is going on a regular basis. They're constantly protesting because, and when you think about the sheer numbers of it, right? You know, 1-2% in the United States is, you know, a couple 100,000 people. In China, you're talking millions of people every time that are unemployed, right? The city of Wuhan, right, to use a city that we've all talked about, I think it's between 10 to 15 million. In the United States, that would be our biggest city, right? In China, it isn't even a tier 1 city.
Yeah.
Right. Tier 1 cities are
It's
like
just incredible.
15 million
The
plus.
scale of China is incredible. That's one thing honestly, the first time I went to China, that was one of the things that just totally shocked me was the scale of how large these cities are and how dense the living conditions are, And I've been to dense cities, but China's a whole different beast. It's incredible. You go city to city and you think you've seen the biggest one, and then the next one's bigger, next one's bigger. It's kind of incredible.
Yeah, so I lived in Shanghai for 2 years, and the great thing about Shanghai is it is, depending on how you count, the biggest city in the world. If you include the undocumented migrant workers, it's about 25 million people in one city. And it seems like it goes on forever, and in most directions it does. But if you actually find the border of the city limits there, it's because, China is so controlled. They have one highway, it's on the northern part of the city, where one side is Shanghai and the other side is just farms. So one side is like farms and rice paddies and stuff, and the other side is just massive skyscrapers. And you're like, how does this happen? Right? And you realize that's central government power.
Yeah, it's crazy. One of the things I think people, are starting to get in tune to, but I think there's a lot of people who need to sort of wake up to it, is China's influence operations do not just go on corporations, rich people, government leaders. They're doing stuff right now actively on the internet, running operations to try to influence everyday people. I think you saw this, I outed a network of Wumaos, a bunch of people who basically, they work for the CCP and they go on the internet, they troll American accounts. If you're unfamiliar with China, Twitter's banned in China. The only way to get on is with a VPN. And by the way, I was talking to the viewers, not you, Jack. Of course, you know that. But these Wumaos, they work like a botnet. And when I outed them, I noticed one thing they all had in common was the, minister there. They all followed him. And I didn't even at him. Within a couple hours, he had blocked me already, the foreign minister for China. And I continued after that. I was getting emails, DMs, all kinds of stuff from these accounts. All of them trying to convince me that there was nothing, wrong with China. China didn't lie. This is actually Americans' faults. And they tried so many different angles with it. It was incredible. But I did this because I noticed that they were within the threads of American politicians and big Twitter accounts, and they were trying to sort of redirect the conversation in different directions. Albeit, I will say, not very well. They're not the best at this, but they are trying to do this actively. So, I think that's something interesting to people. What can you tell people about that?
Yeah, so the term Wumao, to explain that to everybody, it actually comes because their first target, like we were talking before, wasn't for meddling overseas, wasn't the United States. It actually wasn't even Australia or New Zealand. It was Taiwan. So Taiwan does still have democratic elections. And they were going on, Taiwan has Facebook, Taiwan has all these different international social media platforms. And they were going on there pretending to be Taiwanese people and spreading fake news, commenting, claiming all sorts of outlandish things about different Taiwan politicians because they wanted to promote pro-Beijing politicians. And the Taiwanese gave them this nickname, Wu Mao. So Wu Mao in Chinese means 50 cents. And the joke was sort of that apparently they had leaked some, at the time, internal document from the party that said, if you come work for us, we'll pay you 50 cents per post. So every time that you respond trolling somebody or spreading the party line, we're giving you 50 cents. Though it's interestingly enough, they apparently got a new document just a couple of weeks ago that said they got a raise. So it might actually be 70 cents now. Right. So they might be two
I'm
now.
surprised. I don't know. And you know what? I've got a couple trolls that are making a lot of money because
I know, right?
They actually post a lot of times in a row. And I'm like, wow, they're really they're racking up that money if they really are getting 50 cents per tweet here. Like they could do thousands of tweets in an hour. They've got, I will say this, they've got a lot of energy. They're not very good yet. I don't feel
the difference that I want to explain this to people is, you were just talking about the scale of China, right? China has so many people. That idea that we have in the US that labor is expensive, it's the opposite in China. Labor is cheap. Okay. So to hire somebody via Wumao is like nothing, right? And so those aren't bots you're interacting with. Those aren't NPCs. Those are
real
people. Oh yeah, those are real people.
They're absolutely, that's one of the things that I think people misunderstand understand a lot is they'll be like, oh, that you're a bot. And I'm like, no, these are not bots. These are humans running these accounts. They're not good at it. They're not particularly very influential in the way that they're doing it. Like, I don't think that they have the emotional intelligence or the full understanding to be able to. And that's probably a product of the fact that in China, they haven't been able to connect as easily with the West in terms of social media and stuff like that as other people in other countries have. But that sort of intelligence to navigate and sort of try to lead the conversation in one direction, it's just not there. I think it's kind of a terrible operation, but it's there. It exists, and they're trying to do this, and people should be aware of it. Because some people will be susceptible to it.
I go on Reddit a lot as well, as opposed to just Twitter and everything else and Instagram. But on Reddit, there's a lot of influence operations on any page that's talking about China, because Reddit is the same way. It's open. And so they'll try to get other Wumaos to sort of upvote their posts. And there was one the other day. I mean, it was ridiculous. They say, why is everyone country, this long like essay, why is every government around the world racist against China? Don't you understand that China just wants to help everybody? Don't you understand that China dealt with this problem first? And we just want to give our expertise to the rest of the world. And we just want to provide you guys with these wonderful masks and these wonderful tests, which, we get the masks and the tests and they don't work, which actually I think is quite good, because it's showing people that, yes, this was a propaganda operation from the start. Yeah. And I think it also goes to show you the insecurity of the regime of China. There's a lot of people who try to paint the CCP as this sort of unstoppable force. And I always kind of turn around and say, well, if they were so confident and so secure in their abilities, why would they need any of these things, right? Why wouldn't they just do it? Why would they care so much about overseas influence? And the answer is simple. The answer is very simple. It's because they know that they have only become powerful because we have allowed it, because we have financed it. We have expanded their power on the backs of our own manufacturing that we've outsourced, on the backs of our own workers who have lost their jobs, who have lost their factories because of this, and because we are sending our wealth to China. And the Wall Street game, they get all this. They totally get all this. You can go talk to any of them, and if you can get them to be honest, they'll admit it. And this has been sort of the plan for a very long time, and it's not really like anything nefarious, right? It's just about money. People want to make money. They see China as an area for growth, so they want to go in there and they want to deal with China, and they don't necessarily care if Americans or anybody else gets hurt in the process. Understanding that they need us way more than we need them is the first step towards combating China on this. Second is, when we're looking in terms of reparations, in terms of the pandemic.
Yes, I'm glad you're bringing that up. I wanted to ask you about that.
Yeah, we absolutely need to start talking about why would we pay back any of the Chinese debt? Why would just default on all of it? The treasury bills that China's been buying, default, just straight up default on it. And by the way, that default is a down payment for the economic and physical costs of this pandemic. That's a down payment. That's not even the full payment yet, because that's not going to be enough. Because of the economic downturn that we've had to suffer because of this. Not only the emotional downturn in terms of, today I think is 50,000. We broke 50,000 Americans that have died because of the actions and missteps of China, right? And we need to be very clear about that. That it's not, by the way, that's still probably not the most in the world, because I firmly believe that the greatest victims of this thing have been the Chinese people themselves.
Oh, yeah.
We don't know the real number, but I guarantee you, and I always say this, that China can lie about the number all they want, but they can't lie to the families of the Chinese people who have lost their grandparents, who have lost their elders, who've lost their mom and dad. In some cases,
I would argue they're victims alongside the U.S. because I do think the U.S. Well, I'd say the U.S. and the rest of the world and Chinese citizens, that have been affected by this. But it's incredible that they've just basically been allowed to get away with lying about the numbers. Our media in the United States, I was really angry when I saw the headlines that, the day that the U.S. surpassed China's numbers, I got all of these Apple alerts on my phone. I got probably 6, 7 of them, all from major news organizations saying that and parroting basically Chinese propaganda. none of them questioned, hey, are these numbers real? When that should have been the very first question. We all know that China was lying. Everybody knows that. Every government knows that. They all know that the numbers aren't true. We called it out at the time. China has since corrected the numbers, but they're still a lie. They still basically, they knew they were so patently ridiculous the way that they had originally come out that they were like, hey, we should maybe move them up a little bit so they look a little less crazy.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense, by the way. The science doesn't even make sense of it, right? Because we were just talking about the massive scale and the density of Chinese cities. I mean, we talk about New York as such an issue because of its density. Well, almost every major Chinese city is like that, and has, you know, subways and people living on top of each other. They do still have multi-generational households. That's also been identified as an issue in northern Italy was a big issue. And so if you apply any of those standards that have started to come out of this to China, then there's just no way that the numbers can be like that. And so I just really mean to say, like, I lived there for 2 years. I learned to speak fluent Mandarin. You know, my heart goes out to the Chinese people. Lao Bai Xing, you know, sort of, they call them the old 100 names. That's sort of like the, you know, the Chinese deplorables, if you will, just the regular working folks. You know, they have to live there. They're not trying to take down the United States. They're not trying to, you know,
there's actually
on the world stage. They just want to live their lives.
There's a lot of them, you know, from I've been all over to a bunch of different cities in China. And one thing that I did find is in hushed tones, a lot of them really like the United States. The average people really like the US. They're very interested. They want to know a lot about it. And I think that that's an encouraging sign, you know, that there's still, when you see that the people feel that way. I know the party is a very different apparatus, and to them, you know, power is paramount over everything, and that's not going to change with China. They want to dominate everyone, but there's so many people in China who genuinely, they have good, warm feelings towards America. So I do appreciate those people that I interacted with in China. You know, on the government end of things, I feel like their reach is very wide. So another thing I was going to ask you about, and this may get into conspiracy territory, so feel free to be like, to just shove this one off. But okay.
Do you want to put a QAnon hat on real quick?
No. So after that you know, situation with the Wu Maos, where I called out that, you know, net of all of them that were connected to each other and they were all following the foreign minister. One of the interesting things that happened,
well, I mean, it's clear there's some connection with the foreign minister. I mean,
there's no doubt about that. So what I found interesting is the very next day after that, one of the people who was sort of like, I don't know what you would call them, kind of like guides to us in China when I went there with a celebrity. Me and a celebrity went there for a project we were working on, and we were doing like a press tour type thing. And when we went there, this person was with us. They weren't presented as a government official or anything like that. They were supposed to be part of this entertainment company there. That person reached out within 24 hours to me and said, hey, we would love to have you direct a what do they call, World Without Borders? Mm-hmm. World Without Borders show to, you know, give aid to these places. So they were trying to hire me to do an event, to direct it and produce it. And
so they were trying to throw some business at you.
Yes. And so I immediately was like, I think that you might be a little confused or may not know a lot about me, but I'm one of the most border-centric people you'll ever find. So I'm not super interested in producing an event called World Without Borders. But I could see through it, you know, and in my mind, you know, I'll never be able to prove it because I'm not going to ever get documents to this effect or be able to get a recording. But it felt very connected to what happened the day before, and that this was an attempt to sort of like buy some influence.
Buy you off, of course. You know, and by the way, even if it wasn't directly connected, right, it was still obviously an influence operation. They're trying to hire one of the hottest American directors to to run their propaganda, World Without Borders. You know, by the way, they're so good. They're so good at understanding what works with specifically like American liberals. They know how to parrot that line so fast. You know, it's World Without Borders, World Without Racism, the multicultural wonderland. Meanwhile, there's no question about how China takes care of minorities in their own country. Let's talk about the million Uyghurs.
Oh, I've said this a million times. China is the single most racist country I've ever been to, period. I've been all over the world. There's nothing close.
No, there's nothing that comes in terms of it. I mean, and China is by and large an ethno state, which is run by a very strong government. So There's a Hong Kong meme that refers to them as China Nazis, and I think there's a lot that goes into that.
Yep.
What do we know about these, Euchre camps? Like, what do we know that's going on there? Like, I've heard people talk about it, put out figures. We know what's happening. We have the, infrared.
We have some.
We know people are there. We know it's a big number, but do we know what's happening in there and why?
Yeah, I mean, how close is this to turning into a situation where we're really almost ignoring sort of a second coming of what happened in World War II?
Right.
That's a question that I've gotten a lot.
It's horrific, right? And we talk about China not be allowing investigators into the Wuhan Institute of Virology. They're obviously not allowing independent researchers, or last time I checked, the Red Cross was trying to get into these areas to find out what was going on, and they weren't able to get in, or if they were allowed in, it was like some, model setup that they'd had. China's very good at hiding what they need to hide. They are by and large, from the BBC has done investigations on this, they're by and large re-education camps, indoctrination camps, where you go there, you learn Mandarin, you learn Chinese history, proper Chinese history, of course, not that crazy Middle Eastern stuff that you guys might have heard of before. And when we say Uyghurs, by the way, I want to explain that to people. So the Uyghurs aren't like a type of Chinese. They're different nationality than like a Han Chinese. So Xinjiang, if you think about it geographically, right? It's the northwestern part of China. It goes across the desert, and it connects China with Eurasia. So what we're talking about is essentially the old Silk Road, right? Remember hearing about the Silk Road, and that's how China and just sort of touched Rome a little bit. There was a little bit of trade going back and forth. That's Marco Polo and everything. This is kind of what we're talking about, is the people of the Silk Road. They are predominantly Muslim. They are in some cases they've gone and joined other Muslim groups and Muslim causes across the Central Asia and even into Afghanistan, Iraq, and others. And what is happening is that China views this as a situation where they have had some terrorist attacks because of their domination of this area. And so their response to it has essentially been, we need to get rid of Islam, and we need to root out this entire religion, or at least the phrase they use is sinicize, so to China-ize it, almost sinicize the religion, and to put everyone in that area through these camps, so that if you do everything as you're told, and if you take your education and you go through, and then you're able to come out, then hopefully you're not, in terms of the Chinese mind, hopefully you're on the path of being a good Chinese citizen. On the other hand,
aren't they doing some forced marriages too, where they're having some Chinese nationals end up married to some of the people who come out of these camps?
So there have been reports of that. Again, it's very much a black hole in terms of information. So it's a huge low information environment. It's kind of like trying to figure out the origins of coronavirus, right? It's just so low information that we've got anecdotal reports, we've got thinly sourced reports. We just don't know for sure. But that has been a report that's out there. Another one is this idea of forced organ transplants, organ harvesting. Now, this is something that traditionally China has done to other repressed religions and other repressed groups, such as Falun Gong. In some cases, the Chinese house Christians. These are sort of people who have joined Christian groups that don't fall into the approved Chinese Christian groups, or they do have some. And when they get put into prison, their organs are then harvested. This is because China has a massive detriment or a massive deficit in terms of their organ transplants, which goes into Chinese medicine and Chinese thinking. But they basically think that if you give up your organs, you're giving up your life force. It's sort of this ancient Chinese belief. And so they take organs, and they're organ harvesting from the Falun Gong. Now they've been looking at the Uyghurs and saying, well, if there's somebody that, seems compatible, if there's somebody who potentially could be used, they're looking at them as, and if they, don't go along with the re-education, then they're looking at that as another possible pool for organ harvesting.
Wow, that's horrible. I mean, it's just horrible.
I mean, I'm thinking while you're
By the
talking,
way,
I'm thinking
I don't mean to sound so, cold and analytic when I talk about this stuff. I mean, that's obviously disgusting. But,
no, you don't.
No,
you
not
don't
at
at all. No, it's just horrible that
I'm
this
just
goes on
trying to
and gets no
report
attention.
what I can, as with my analyst hat on.
I think it's really important. I think if anything we're talking about, I think this is probably the most important issue, that we're just ignoring the fact of, what is going on, things like this in China. And they're in the meantime sitting on, the UN, they're sitting at the World Health Organization.
The Human Rights Council at the UN, not just the UN, but the Human Rights Council.
How could you have a group like that on the Human Rights Council? I mean, it's like when they had Iran on there. It makes no sense. Which, again,
I think
back to what I said earlier, that's the subversion.
I think they just made a mistake when they named it, and they actually meant to name it the Human Rights Abuser Council. And this is like a club where they all get together.
So
they're trying to figure out new ways to abuse human rights, because that's the only explanation. That would make a lot more sense, because you've got Iran, you've got Cuba,
and so they just dropped a word.
Yep.
It's absolutely insane that and also you think about the election interference. That you think of things like TikTok. Can you talk a little bit about what influence, potentially
ban TikTok for a variety of reasons, but ban TikTok. That's like 100%.
But it's not like it's not enough to tell American people. Like when I'm talking to my daughter and I say you can't use TikTok. Why? I mean, I can explain the social, emotional, neurodevelopmental reasons why I think TikTok's harmful. But I want her to also understand, and other moms, why TikTok is, a national security threat.
I mean, if you wanted to explain it in a very quick way, it's TikTok is the Chinese spying app.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And not only that, this is what I would say is China, I think that their greatest win from TikTok, it's not biometric data. It's not what's coming from your phone. It's not any of that stuff. It's not any of these things they could piecemeal from that. I think their biggest win from something like TikTok is that they are distracting American teenagers from being highly educated, highly motivated individuals. Now, if we end up in a world dance-off where we have to fight each other with the power of dance, the US is going to kick China's ass. But if we need engineers and scientists and doctors and, we need serious people to solve problems and fight a war or do something like that, we've distracted a whole generation of American teenagers to sit in front of their phone and do silly dances.
I threw out a scenario, I think a couple of weeks ago on Twitter with my intel officer, mind on, and I said, the MSS, Ministry of State Security, has mapped out every single key leader in their target nations, and they're not just looking at their title and organization and stint, they're looking at their families, looking at their wives, looking at their children, and I guarantee you they know specifically which ones of those key leaders have TikTok accounts. Probably not just TikTok, but obviously TikTok is the one they control, so they can see every video, every message, every, if you think you deleted something, guess what? If you think it was private, if you think it wasn't, that was just a personal message. No, it wasn't. They've got it all saved. And it wouldn't surprise me if China if they were running a good intelligence operation, and using this data, they could easily be collecting the data of those key leaders and their children. And let's say someone posts something incriminating, something embarrassing, now you've got blackmail.
Yeah. Sure. I mean, but also,
I have no doubt they're doing that.
And also they never even had to send a single agent into the United States to do it.
Nope.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, they're brilliant. I mean, they're absolutely brilliant at that. I mean, their 2-year-olds are doing Rubik's cubes in like under 10 seconds, and our teenagers are mindlessly making these, videos.
They're like, can you follow me? I'm doing this. It's ridiculous.
It's not called TikTok in China. It's called Douyin, but it's the same thing. And they do also have it though. And their version has a facial recognition capability to it, which obviously if you don't think that the international version doesn't have that, then you're just a little naive. But on the Chinese version, Douyin, because Chinese people are more accepting of facial recognition and AI technology, they have ability where you can watch a video of somebody and then pause it and then click that person's face, and then it can pull up every other video that person is in.
Wow. Can you find their social credit score from doing that as well?
Well, only you can increase your social credit score if you're talking about how much you love the Chinese government and Xi Jinping, and then you can decrease it by talking about Winnie the Pooh.
Wow. So if we had a Chinese credit score right now in America for talking about the World Health Organization on YouTube, what is going to happen to us?
Mine would be very low.
We'd be pretty low. We'd be pretty low. But one thing I also want to point out to everybody is that, and they've seen this with Chinese bloggers that they've arrested, quarantined, right? Forced quarantined. They've people who are making just little selfie videos as they drive around the city in some of these lockdown areas. They've been arresting them, and when that affects your social credit score doesn't only affect yourself. If your social credit score is too low, then they're going to look at your whole family unit and say, all right, you guys aren't allowed to get basic health access, or your kids might not be allowed to go to school, or you might not be able to buy train tickets, or you might not be able to ride the bus. I mean, these are very basic levels of controls that the Chinese government is tying into the social credit system. So, I mean, just imagine that. You wouldn't be able to ride a bus. You wouldn't be able to take an Uber, right? Because you said something on a video. And you wonder why Silicon Valley loves China so much. They're like, oh, this is exactly what we want.
I've tried explaining this to people a lot of different ways, and I think one of the ways people have understood it the best is that China actually operates a lot like Hunger Games, where there's districts, but not just in a physical form, but in a mental form. There's districts, that's how it really feels there. I mean, like, I know in Beijing, you can't go into the financial district unless you have a permit to go be in that area. It's sort of the same thing. They have officers there. They check to make sure you have it, all that stuff. It's the same concept with if your social credit score is not high enough, you can't get on a train and go somewhere you want to go. You're pretty much imprisoned into this small thing.
Right. So it's not even on your shoulders. It's like, it'd be like if I had a spicy tweet about Hillary Clinton and then they said my kid wasn't allowed to go to school.
Yeah. It's just crazy.
Right.
It's crazy.
Well, I mean, what we're kind of seeing, we're not too far away from like where UK is at. I mean, as far as like right now, if we can't put this up on YouTube because you're not allowed to talk anything criticizing or disinformation about the World Health Organization, which is just a dissenting opinion. You can get it taken off of YouTube. What's next? Twitter. What's next? Live stream.
Yeah.
I
mean, we see all these mistakes happen only in one direction. There was a situation today where I helped a couple people. Well, quite a few people shared this Biden meme, and they were suspended and their accounts were locked. And I helped get them all freed again by talking to Twitter and telling them how ridiculous they are. And they freed these people today. But I can't do that for everybody, and neither can other people who know somebody at Twitter. They can't do that for everybody. The reality is the game's rigged against people on the right on social media. But the encouraging thing is that even though the game's rigged against us, we're still beating the hell out of the left on social media. I have more YouTube subscribers than Joe Biden does. So, if that's any indication of the enthusiasm that they have, I think there is a disparity.
Which, interestingly enough, as we're talking about coronavirus, and while obviously we don't believe the thing was man-made, but if you look in terms of the timeline of this thing, that there was a study done by a social media tracking company, a data company in New York, that looked at the timeline of who was talking about coronavirus on social media. And if you go back to mid-January, early February, there were two groups on social media that were really beating the drum over this. And it was Hong Kong and it was the US right wing. There's like the two that were really warning the world about coronavirus. And yet they turn 100%. Around and say, oh, conservatives don't believe in coronavirus. They think it's a hoax. And what are you talking about? That's like the data is very clear on this. We were the first to warn about it.
Now they're saying we want to inject people with Clorox. We're not dealing with the brightest bulbs in the box, okay? That's something I wanted to ask you about anyways. I mean, like, how do they come up with this stuff? Where do they come up with the word Clorox from yesterday's press conference? Like, what goes on in their brain?
So what happened was, and this is a characteristic smear attack. It's something that the media is quite good at, especially in the Trump era, because Trump really does sort of use this stream of consciousness for form of speaking. He just kind of says what's on his mind, and he also is a sort of nonlinear thinker, and in some cases a nonlinear speaker. So it's very easy to take little chunks of what he said and don't play it in context, and it sounds like he's saying one thing. The Very Fine People hoax is an example of that. So the Very Fine People hoax now is the disinfectant hoax. The disinfectant hoax goes because when most of us use the word disinfectant, we are talking about like Clorox or Lysol or isopropyl alcohol or something. But if you look at the actual context of the statement, and I've by the way, I've had reporters reaching out to me today saying, "Oh, Jack, what do you think about this? What do you think about that?" And I turn around and I say, "Look," I just send them the transcript. I don't even respond. I just send him the transcript where he's talking about UV technology and a new study that was done and a new patent that's been coming out. The Department of Homeland Security had literally they had the doctor on from there. He had just done a presentation on it, and Trump was responding to that presentation about UV light and talking about, oh, is there a way that we could potentially use that inside the body, right? But of course, he said inject disinfectant. And so you can easily uncharitably, and if you're operating in bad faith, which of course the media is, you can take that out of context and make it look really bad. But if you put it in context, you can see that he's talking about, and Cedars-Sinai has a contract to look at this stuff right now. About 3 days ago, and it specifically says viruses and bacteria inclusive of coronavirus. Now that being said, I have no idea if that works, if that doesn't work. It says they're studying it, so they're trying it. And but the idea that the president was talking about, drinking bleach or Clorox, it's like an IQ test. It's literally like an IQ test.
I said, if anybody injects themselves with Clorox, I'm sorry, they're an idiot. It's not anybody else's fault. If you stick Clorox in a syringe and put it in you, you are an idiot. There's nothing I can do to help you. It was going to happen at some point anyways, I don't
know, man. I think that lady with the fish cleaner killed her husband, though.
I think so, 100%. I'm just waiting for the
like
Dateline episode
kind of situation. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's going to be a Dateline. I guarantee you.
They came back and they said the guy, like, there's a story out today. The guy was known as like highly intelligent and well respected and everything.
Yep.
No,
it was definitely murder.
And by the way, they all hated Trump. So she came out, and it was like the media gave her an alibi. They gave her an alibi.
Yeah. Yep. You could make an argument they're accomplices in this. I mean, it's honestly, it's so ridiculous. Like, everybody on the right knew there was something wrong with the story, but there's this sort of on the left, like, as long as it's bad for Trump, they don't care if they're protecting a murderer or whoever it is. Like, I talked about this actually with Laura Trump yesterday. I was on a show with her, and she was asking me a question. I just repeated that thing. They hate Trump more than they love our country. So when something will hurt him, even if it damages our country, they'll ride with it. As long as it hurts him, they're good with it. Even if it's protecting a lady who probably killed her husband. And I can't wait to see this episode.
To square the circle on that a little bit, we were talking before about Chinese influence operations, and we were talking about TikTok. So China's CCTV International, which is now known as CGTN, China Global Television Network, has a TikTok account and a Douyin account in China. And if you go to that account right now, you can find that what they've been posting, and people sent this to me, what they've been posting is they took a Trevor Noah monologue from The Daily Show where he was attacking America and promoting China, translated it into Mandarin with Mandarin subtitles underneath of him bashing the United States, calling it the America virus. And they put music to it, and they've made it go viral in China now. So Chinese propaganda outlets are actually playing Trevor Noah videos. And by the way, those aren't being made. I want to be very clear about this. Those aren't being made for the Chinese people. Those are being made for everybody else around the world to look at this and say, look, even your own people, even your own Westerners are attacking America and making fun of America, laughing at America. It's kind of like, I don't know if Trevor Noah's show is more like this. It's kind of like how John Oliver's show is just kind of like a form of mass hypnosis. You never looked at how it's set up. It's just like it's like there was a YouTube video about it somewhere where they went through this, where it's a little bit of information. He pauses. There's a laugh track. He smiles. Then there's a little bit of more information, and it's just to get you to agree with him about whatever he's saying, about whatever political issue he's talking about. It's just to get you to agree with him. And
Yeah, and if
it
you don't, you're
follows like
stupid.
every precept of mass hypnosis that's out there.
Exactly. And they build it up in such a way that if you disagreed with something they were saying, it's made out so that you immediately would feel like there's something wrong with you for disagreeing. It's actually, a lot of it's based on principles in psychology, and that's something a lot of people don't realize about TV and film and late night shows. There's actually a lot of psychology that goes into all of these shows and the production of these shows. People know what the psychology is when they're doing this. And
what you're talking about is in-grouping and out-grouping.
Yeah.
Right. So if you get the joke and you laugh along, that means you must be agreed. That means you're part of the group. But if you don't laugh at the joke when everyone else is laughing at the joke, then that means you must not belong to the group. So of course you want to belong to the group, don't you? Right. Well, of course that means you must agree with whatever they're saying.
Yeah. That's like the View audience is a great example of that. If you ever notice with the View audience, like they're all with, like, they pack that room with people who will cheer for super far left ideas. Like, you could literally go in there and say that America should, gift wrap our country and hand it over to China. And as long as it was an idea presented by somebody on the far left, everybody in that room would clap like seals. Like, they'd be like,
Media Matters, by the way, is going to come in and clip this and then just have you saying that, and it's going to be like Jack Posobiec and Robbie Starbucks
attacking the View. No, but it seriously, it really is the case. There's sort of this.
Well, no, what I try to do is when I say, because now I know how the Media Matters game works, so I try to write their headline for them, and I just make it so that it's the right attack. So when I even said John Oliver is mass hypnosis, like, I want them to write that headline. Jack Posobiec said John Oliver is mass hypnosis.
It honestly, these shows, there's no escaping it. I mean, there's a reason why, if you put a little kid in front of a TV and you put on TV shows, they go into a trance-like state. It happens. Anybody who has kids knows this. If you put them in front of a TV, turn on a show, they end up like, after a while, they're totally connected to it. It's why you see some kids have major behavioral problems with turning off the TV or turning off an iPad. It becomes addictive. It really is something that has a great effect on the psychological process that's going on in their mind and their development. It's something that we really need to be curious about in America.
There's a reason they call it television programming.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Ooh,
it's true. There really is. It really is true. Another thing somebody talked about too is the TikTok nurses. Somebody in the Periscope, we're looking at the comments here, and somebody brought up the TikTok nurses. The nurses on TikTok and the doctors who are doing these dance videos on TikTok. I think it's been really, like, we've talked about this. It's very disenchanting to the idea that everybody should be staying at home and locking down their life and basically like rationing food for now so they can make ends meet. I think that it's really pissing a lot of people off where they're at home, they're broke, they don't think they can pay their bills this month, and then they see these doctors and nurses dancing with like fake butts put in. There's one that we saw where they have they put fake butts in their pants. And they're like twerking in the hospital, in the emergency room,
or the ICU. That's
or the
the thing.
ICU,
Even if it wasn't a coronavirus outbreak going on, I mean, can you imagine having a loved one in the ICU and you go out in the hall to like take a break and they're doing dances? Like,
so yeah,
it's just insensitive at the least and completely unprofessional and unethical. I mean, it's not appropriate.
When Roger Stone was on trial a couple of weeks ago, I was covering it live. And one day I had to leave early because, and I did say this publicly, I had to leave in the middle of the trial because I had a family member that was rushed to the hospital. And, they were in the hospital for about a week and a half and just a little touch and go at some points. But I got to tell you, if that's Junior trying to get in the door, by the way.
I said it sounds like somebody woke up from their nap. I was going to give people a little bit of a caution. If you hear our kids fighting, we can hear them fighting too. They're downstairs and they're not listening about be quiet for a little while mom and dad do this. You guys can watch a movie together and just chill out. They're old enough, by the way. They're 11 and 7. Long
story short is, if I just can't imagine as emotional as that was for my family. If and even see Jack Jr. is still emotional about it. That's why he's so upset right now. If we had seen the nurses twerking up and down the hallways when we're trying to figure out what's going on, I might just grab him. Hey,
yeah,
hey,
get him.
Hey.
Everybody wants to see the little cutie. Look at that little cutie.
Hey.
Hey, cutie. Oh my goodness.
You're happy now.
He's like, I'm done.
You just need a dad. You can, and we've taken up a ton of your time too. So if you need to go, just let us know.
No. But just bottom line on the, and I've had a lot of nurses reach out to me when I was talking about the TikTok nurse situation, and they were even saying as well. They said, look, we don't think this is a good look for us. We're struggling as much as anyone else. We've had people that are really in bad situations, and I've had friends who are nurses that have deployed on the USNS Comfort, Navy friends of mine. I've had friends that have volunteered for the front lines in New York where they need more nurses right now. So if you've got enough time, and they were even saying like, hey, if you've got enough, I had a New York nurse reach out to me, and she said, look, if you've got enough time to do TikTok videos, why don't you volunteer and help us out, because we could really need it right now.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. It's really tough. Those realities, I think it's something that everybody's sort of, we're collectively experiencing, that we have two different realities. Actually, we have more than two, but we have like all these different realities sort of converging on a daily basis, and it creates a lot of issues, and I think this is one of them with the TikTok nurses and all that is, and you see the protesters, and now there's videos of people staging videos of nurses versus protesters, and it just, the whole thing is really toxic.
Nurses in a protest, I get it. It's obviously a very powerful image, but at the same time, and I've reached out to other nurses and I've asked them about this. Look, this isn't political. Like, we're not asking somebody if they supported Donald Trump when they come in to get put on a ventilator or something.
Yeah.
It's, they're just there to help people, period. End of story. Right. And the idea that, and we looked into that, and there were some, SEIU was behind some of those, the Service Employees Industrial Union, and using a nurse as a political ploy just doesn't really seem like something we want to be doing. The politicization of,
it's like losing children.
It's gross. It's just gross to do. It really is. It's a gross thing to do. It's a gross tactic. I think that we have to.
My take was, if you're going to protest social distance while protesting social distancing.
Yeah, exactly. And you know what I was going to say too is there's just a disconnect between a lot of people on the left who are saying like, oh, these people that are out there protesting to open things up are monsters and they're this or that. I don't know, what the disconnect is for them. These people are regular human beings. They want to get back to work. They don't want to be unemployed. They're afraid of not being able to pay their bills. They're afraid of not being able to feed their kids. I understand why they're mad. I get it. Even if I was a governor of one of those states and I knew that the sound medical advice was to close down. Let's pretend it was Ebola and I knew 50% of people were dying, but these people were out there. I would still understand why they were so desperate to be done with this. I would get it, but deep down, I would obviously in Ebola make the decision to keep things shut down. But in this case, as we see more and more studies coming out, the antibody studies saying that, the death rate, mortality rate is actually as low as 0.1 or as high as 0.3, in these antibody studies coming from big, institutions like Stanford, USC. There's some happening in other countries. It makes a lot of those same people that are on those lines protesting wonder, would we have even shut down if we knew this? If we knew the death rate was at that point? I
think the disconnect, of course, is that this is a new virus, right? It's a pandemic, not endemic. So it's something that we didn't have a vaccine for. It's not the flu that's been around for thousands of years, cohabitating this planet with us. It's a brand new virus. We're not sure what it does, but it certainly eats up a lot of people's lungs, and that's not good. There's also stuff it does in the blood and neurologically, that long-term effects that we're still not really sure about. So I can understand the need for caution, and the idea that kind of the way I looked at it early on was I said, look, we're going to have to move to a red zones, green zones kind of situation, maybe yellow zones in the area. And actually Pennsylvania, the governor just announced he's going to be doing that, where obviously areas like New York City, are going to need to be under lockdown longer, because that's become a petri dish for this thing. It's absolutely horrific. And that's America's, that's for many reasons one of our top cities, right? It's certainly a financial capital. It's a cultural hub for the United States. And for ourselves as a country, looking at one of our greatest cities to be taken down by this kind of virus, I mean, that's obviously something where, in my mind, I do want some kind of retribution for that. I do want some kind of repayment for that. And that's why I go back to China, the CCP, the WHO, and all of these organizations that in some cases failed, or in other cases potentially refused to give information to us, to give us the sequencing early on, to let us know what was happening as soon as we could, because we figured out. Now, look, that being said, China locked down their government their cities months before we did, right? In Wuhan, Hubei province, and so they locked down tens of millions of people. At one point, their entire country was locked down, so over 1.5 billion. So there's something that really freaked them out about this virus that they don't want us to know, and I don't think we've quite figured out what that is yet.
I don't think that is, I agree with you 100%. And I am worried about the long-term effects. I also, like hearing these stories of reinfection, we don't have good science on the reinfection stuff yet. That would be a big deal if you really
anything, quite frankly. I think there's an article I read yesterday that said it's like we're tiptoeing through a dark house. And I thought that was very appropriate.
Yep. We're waiting to step on the thing that really is going to show us,
right.
That's what's so concerning about the fact that China has lied and hidden so many things, is that they know ultimately what the reason is that they reacted the way they did. So, they haven't shared that reason with the world still,
Right. And so I think that, and look, I'm a China guy. I'm a national security guy. I'm not a medical guy. I don't try to, I don't try to be. But in the sense that I've been a political pundit, I give all credit to the president and the governors for saying, you know what, there's no moral high ground higher than public health, right? I mean, that's like so if you're going to err on the side of caution in terms of public health, I'm going to give you a pass on that. I'm definitely going to give you a pass on that, because there's no question. Obviously, they're operating in the public interest for that. I don't think that any president or governor would willingly want their economy to, to be halted, to
crumble,
to come to a crashing stop. Obviously,
especially somebody like Trump.
Yeah, and especially somebody like Trump. Plus, when you're, in the middle of literally an election year. And it was
predicated on your great economy,
that's when the economy is the thing. So, when I looking at this, and obviously there were a lot of people saying that were trying to tell Donald Trump, they said, don't only tie yourself to the stock market and the economy, because you never know what's going to happen. And, I don't think that anybody predicted that a pandemic would happen this year, but there have been a lot of people, Nassim Taleb, who have been out there talking about these sort of events. They're not black swans in the sense that they're unpredictable, but they're white swans in the sense that they're rare but predictable.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Any other last quick questions before I got to roll?
Huh?
Any other last quick questions before I got to roll here?
Last question would be, how actually, there's two questions. I'm going to act like a journalist at the White House. I have two questions. The first one is, what does it look like for us to detach from China? Because I think that that's part of the answer to retribution, is us detaching from them in a lot of ways, right, and bringing manufacturing, bringing a lot of things back here, making sure critical infrastructure, medicine, things like that are being made here. What does that look like? And second part of my question, how upset were you the day that the girls who work at OWN said that I was more attractive than you?
Well, so I'm going to ask you your second question first. A lot of those people are no longer with the company. They've moved on. So there's a reason for that. Just saying. Second,
the word of sound mind.
Go back to your first question though. It's no, we need to decouple. We absolutely need to decouple. We need to bring the manufacturing back as much as possible. We need to be not only bringing those jobs back in terms of critical infrastructure, we need to use whatever national security authority we can under this, because we've just been shown how much of a national security issue it is for us that we cannot build things in the United States. And if you need places that do it, look no further than Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Wisconsin, and maybe if you want to go into mining, we can talk a little bit about southern Greenland.
Yep. I like that. And I will boost your confidence before you go. One of the commenters, Anna DeLeon, says that we are both, in caps lock, both handsome and intelligent men. So I think that Anna's a very smart person, clearly.
That's fair.
Thank you so much for joining us, Jack. Thank you so much for joining us, Jack.
Thanks, Jack.
Go play with that little cutie and keep being amazing.
Appreciate you guys. Likewise.
Bye.
Bye, guys. Thank you for tuning in today.
Have a great weekend, everybody.
Oh, I have to end it over there.
Oh, yeah, it's still going.
Oops. Forgot I have to end it over here.
One American News, OANN.com. Got to throw that in.
Oh, yeah. You got to go. You got to go visit. All right. Bye, Jack.
Bye, guys. Have a great weekend.
Bye. Take care.